fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120.
There is a serious, government-funded scientific effort to study unidentified objects in American airspace, and most people have never heard it described that way. Instead, what most people know is the noise, the conspiracy theories, the whistleblowers, the late-night speculation, and that noise has done something almost paradoxical. It has made it harder, not easier, to take the real research seriously. This video is about where the line actually falls between rigorous UAP investigation and pseudoscience. Not because the answer is simple, but because the distinction matters more than almost anyone is talking about. Let's start with what is verifiably real. In June 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary report analyzing 144 UAP incidents spanning from November 2004 to March 2021. That report was not a fringe document. It was a formal intelligence assessment requested by Congress, produced by the same institutional apparatus that monitors nuclear proliferation and foreign adversaries. By May 2022, the Pentagon's tracked database had grown to over 400 incidents, and on July 15, 2022, the Department of Defense officially stood up a dedicated office, AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, created under a specific section of the National Defense Authorization Act. As of August 2022, AARO had logged 510 UAP reports. Between May 2023 and June 2024 alone, it received 757 more. Those are not rumor figures. Those are bureaucratic, auditable counts. But here is the part that gets lost in almost every popular telling of this story. The reason the US government got serious about UAP is not because anyone in Washington became convinced that aliens exist. It is because military pilots were reporting objects near sensitive airspace that could not be immediately explained. And unexplained things near aircraft carriers and restricted zones are, by definition, a national security problem. The framing is threat identification, not contact protocol. That shift in framing is everything. When you approach UAP as a potential foreign technology, an atmospheric anomaly, or a sensor artifact, you are doing something categorically different from approaching it as evidence of extraterrestrial visitation. One starts with data, the other starts with a conclusion. AARO applies what it formally describes as both the scientific method and intelligence analysis tradecraft. Reports are categorized by domain. Between May 2023 and June 2024, 708 of the 757 new reports occurred in the air domain and 49 in the space domain. None were in maritime or transmedium domains during that period. Of the cases resolved, 49 were identified as prosaic objects: balloons, birds, unmanned aerial systems. 21 cases were flagged as meriting further analysis. That process of elimination, mundane first, anomalous later, is the scientific method applied to a genuinely difficult data problem. In 2022, NASA commissioned an independent 16-member study team, led by astrophysicist David Spergel, to examine UAP from a scientific standpoint. The team reported in September 2023 that it found no credible evidence of extraterrestrial origin among the observations studied. That conclusion was not a dismissal of the phenomenon, it was a boundary condition. It said, here is what the current evidence does not support. Good science draws those lines clearly. Now consider the contrast. Pseudo-scientific UAP discourse tends to move in the opposite direction. It begins with anomaly, treats every unresolved case as confirmation of the most extraordinary hypothesis, and interprets institutional skepticism as evidence of a cover-up. This is not just philosophically sloppy, it is empirically harmful because it pollutes the data environment that serious researchers depend on. Sean Kirkpatrick, AARO's founding director from 2022 through December 2023, addressed this directly in a Scientific American op-ed. He stated plainly that he found no evidence of alien life in the data he reviewed, and that the allegations of government cover-up he encountered during his tenure derived from, in his words, inadvertent or unauthorized disclosures, not from hidden truths. That is a striking thing for a senior DoD official to say publicly. and it is almost entirely ignored by the communities most invested in UAP discourse. There is a longer institutional history here worth understanding. The Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP, ran from 2007 to 2012 with about $22 million in funding through the Defense Intelligence Agency. The Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force operated from 2017 to 2020 within the Office of Naval Intelligence, specifically to standardize how UAP reports were collected and described. These programs existed before the current cultural moment. They were not created in response to public pressure or congressional theater. They were, from their inception, classified military efforts to account for unexplained observations near sensitive assets. The 2004 USS Nimitz incident is the clearest public example of what triggered that institutional concern. Navy aviators described a white oblong object over the Pacific near Southern California. The encounter was corroborated not just by pilot testimony, but by tracking data from the AN SPY-1B radar and the Aegis combat system. The Pentagon officially released the video footage in April 2020, confirming through Naval Air Systems Command that the footage was genuine and the object remains unidentified. Whoa. Unidentified, not extraterrestrial, unidentified. That gap between those two words is exactly where pseudoscience enters the conversation and exactly where real research has to hold the line. One of the most underreported recent developments is a 2025 workshop, AARO, conducted in partnership with Associated Universities, Inc. and Florida State University. 40 participants from government, academia, and independent research gathered specifically to address how to analyze UAP narrative reports using rigorous data standardization methods. The problem they were working on is not exotic. It is the same problem that faces any field dealing with inconsistent, observer-dependent data. How do you build a reliable dataset out of reports that vary wildly in training, equipment, and context? That is a real scientific challenge, and the fact that serious institutions are now formally applying methodology to it is arguably more significant than any single unresolved sighting. AARO also tracked health and safety dimensions. Its fiscal year 2024 consolidated report noted no reported physiological impacts or adverse health effects from UAP observations during that period, while acknowledging that such effects may manifest later. That kind of careful epistemic humility, noting the absence of evidence while not claiming evidence of absence, is precisely what distinguishes credible inquiry from motivated reasoning. So what separates real UAP research from pseudoscience? It is not whether you believe something strange is happening in the sky. Strange things are clearly happening. It is whether you are willing to follow the evidence without preloading the conclusion. It is whether you treat an unresolved case as a question rather than an answer. It is whether your methodology would allow you to be wrong. The institutions doing this work are imperfect, slow, constrained by classification, and sometimes resistant to transparency. But they are applying falsifiable methods to a real dataset. And in a field this saturated with motivated belief, that distinction is not a small thing. The question worth sitting with is this: if rigorous investigation eventually produces a mundane explanation for most of these cases, will that be seen as a failure? Or will it be recognized as science doing exactly what science is supposed to do? If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to the channel.